She was nothing but a prisoner in a dimly lit cell. They thought her broken, insignificant. The guards laughed as they pushed her around, confident in their power over this seemingly fragile woman. But there was something in her eyes, a calculation behind the fear, the way she held herself even in exhaustion, little things that began to disturb them. Something wasn't right. When the truth finally emerged, the mocking stopped. The laughter died. The room froze as they realized their terrible mistake. They hadn't captured a helpless woman. They had caged a legend. From which city in the world are you watching this video today? If this story intrigues you, consider subscribing for more tales of hidden strength and unexpected revelations. Every legend has a beginning. The rain hammered against the reinforced windows of the Vreskin military compound, creating shadows that danced across the concrete floor of interrogation room 3. Inside, a woman knelt, her body hunched in apparent exhaustion, dark hair falling forward to obscure most of her face. Her prison garments hung loosely on her frame, stained with what might have been blood, or simply the rust-colored water that dripped from the compound's aging pipes. Colonel Marique Draylock circled her with measured steps, the polished heels of his boots clicking against the floor in a rhythm designed to unnerve. "Let's try this again," he said, his voice carrying the practiced patience of a man accustomed to extracting information. "Where were you taking the communications package?" The woman, known only as the prisoner in cell 7, trembled visibly. When she spoke, her voice emerged as little more than a whisper. "I told you, I'm just a courier. They don't tell me anything." From her position by the door, Sergeant Evelina Tarr snorted. "Pathetic. 3 weeks, and she's still giving us nothing but village rat droppings." She stepped forward, grabbing a fistful of the prisoner's hair and yanking her head back. "Maybe another night without water will loosen that tongue." The prisoner's eyes widened in terror, tears forming at the corners. "Please, I don't know anything important." Lieutenant Soren Castrol observed from behind the one-way glass, something tugging at his instincts. Despite the prisoner's apparent terror, her eyes had performed a rapid sweep of the room in the moment Sergeant Tarr had pulled her head back, cataloging exits, noting the positions of the guards, registering the surveillance camera in the corner. "Sir," he said, addressing Colonel Draylock through the communication system, "request permission to review the prisoner's personal effects again." Draylock waved dismissively without looking away from his subject. "Waste of time, Lieutenant. She's nobody, wrong place, wrong time. Squeeze her for any scraps about troop movements and be done with it." Castrol nodded curtly, but couldn't shake his unease. As Sergeant Tarr dragged the prisoner to her feet, her shirt tore slightly at the collar, revealing an unusual scar along her collarbone. Not a typical injury, but something precise, almost surgical. "Take her back to her cell," Draylock ordered, already turning to his paperwork. "We'll try again tomorrow." 2 guards flanked the prisoner, half dragging her toward the door. As they passed, one leaned close to her ear. "Heard the colonel's losing interest in you," he taunted. "Know what happens to prisoners nobody wants to question anymore?" The prisoner stumbled, seemingly overcome with terror, grabbing the doorframe for support. Castrol noticed her fingers pressing against a specific point on the metal, where a biometric scanner was embedded beneath the surface. As the guards threw her back into cell 7, their laughter echoed down the corridor. "Waste of rations, that one." The heavy door clanged shut. Through the small observation window, Lieutenant Castrol watched as the prisoner curled into a corner, the very image of defeat. But in the brief moment before she buried her face in her arms, he caught a flicker of something in her eyes. Not fear, not resignation, calculation. Over the next 3 days, Lieutenant Castrol found himself increasingly drawn to the surveillance footage of Cell 7. Something about the prisoner, who records listed as Nayara Zoltan, nagged at his military instincts. While reviewing night footage, he noticed she never truly slept. She maintained the appearance of sleep, but her breathing pattern never reached the depth of actual slumber. When footsteps approached her cell during guard rotations, subtle changes in her posture indicated awareness, despite her closed eyes. During an impromptu cell inspection, Sergeant Tarr had discovered tiny scratches on the wall behind Nayara's bed. "Counting days," Tarr had concluded with a smirk. But Castrol recognized something else entirely. The marks corresponded perfectly to the guard rotation patterns. "Permission to run a deeper background verification, sir," Castrol requested during the morning briefing. Colonel Draylock looked up with annoyance. You're still fixated on the courier? Fine. Waste your time if you must, Lieutenant. That afternoon, Dr. Kamar Zivan requested Castrol's presence in the medical bay. The facility physician's usual composure seemed disturbed. I've been examining the prisoner as ordered, Zivan said, voice lowered despite the private setting. Lieutenant, have you seen these? He displayed images from Nayara's medical scan. These scars aren't from torture or accidents. They're methodical, precisely placed along nerve clusters. Meaning someone has surgically modified this woman. And this, he indicated a partial symbol visible along her spine. I've been researching this marking. It's not in any standard military database. That night, a guard collapsed outside cell 7, convulsing with symptoms resembling a seizure. Medical examination revealed a nearly imperceptible puncture wound at the base of his skull. The compound went on high alert, security protocols elevated to maximum. Lieutenant Castrol reviewed the footage of the guard's collapse, watching frame by frame as Nayara was transferred back to her cell after interrogation. There, a moment where she stumbled against the guard, her hand briefly making contact with his neck, so swift, so natural in movement that it appeared completely accidental. Computer, Castrol commanded, run facial recognition analysis on prisoner Zoltan, Nayara against specialized military databases. Authorization Castrol 7 Delta 9. The system hummed as it processed. Warning. Accessing classified databases requires commanding officer approval. Castrol hesitated only briefly before entering Colonel Draylock's override code, a violation that could end his career, but the gnawing certainty that they were missing something critical drove him forward. The screen flashed red as matches began appearing, then abruptly went black. Seconds later, his communication device chimed with an urgent summons to Colonel Draylock's office. He found the colonel standing rigid behind his desk, his face drained of color. Dr. Zivan was already present, looking as though he might be sick. Lieutenant, Draylock said, his voice unnaturally controlled. It seems your paranoia wasn't unfounded after all. He gestured to a classified file displayed on his screen. The symbol Dr. Zivan identified belongs to the Umbra Protocol. The Ghost Unit? Castrol's throat went dry. I thought that was military mythology, propaganda to frighten enemies. So did most of High Command, Draylock replied, until confirmation arrived 10 minutes ago. The prisoner in Cell 7 isn't Nayara Zoltan. He turned the screen, revealing a classified military file with a photograph that, despite deliberate disfigurement, was unmistakably their prisoner. She is Commander Lystra Morvain. The name hit Castrol like a physical blow. The Phantom of Karashev, the operative credited with collapsing 3 enemy regimes. The woman who had infiltrated General Valen's impenetrable compound and left his entire security detail alive but immobilized, a calling card more terrifying than death. But why would she? Castrol began. Alarms blared throughout the facility, cutting him off. Emergency lights bathed the office in pulsing red. Security breach in the East Wing, announced the automated system. Power fluctuations detected in sectors 2, 5, and 8. Draylock slammed his fist onto the communication panel. Full lockdown. All personnel to battle stations. Triple the guard on Cell 7 immediately. But as they rushed toward the detention block, Castrol already knew what they would find. The pieces aligned with terrible clarity. The mapping of guard rotations. The biometric scanners she'd touched. The strategic questions she'd asked during interrogations that had seemed like pleas for mercy at the time. She had never been their prisoner at all. They had been hers. Armed guards surrounded Cell 7, weapons trained on the reinforced door. Colonel Draylock pushed through them, face contorted with fury masking fear. Lieutenant Castrol and Dr. Zivan followed close behind. Open it, Draylock commanded. The guard at the control panel hesitated. Sir, protocols recommend. Now, soldier. The door slid open to reveal Nayara, no, Commander Morvain, sitting calmly on the edge of her bed. She no longer hunched her shoulders or averted her gaze. Despite the filthy prison garments and the weeks of apparent abuse, she now exuded a presence that filled the small cell. Sergeant Tar stepped forward, stun baton raised. On your knees, prisoner. Her voice cracked on the final word, betraying her fear. Commander Morvain tilted her head slightly, regarding Tar with the detached interest one might give an insect. The sergeant's baton trembled visibly before clattering to the floor from nerveless fingers. Morvain stood, and despite no obvious change in her physical appearance, she seemed taller, her posture revealing perfect military bearing. The transformation was so complete that Castrol found himself instinctively wanting to stand at attention. "Commander Lystra Morvain," Colonel Draylock pronounced, attempting to reclaim authority with 6 armed guards at his back. "You are hereby charged with espionage, infiltration, and—" "You should have verified my identity days ago," Morvain interrupted, her voice now clear and commanding, nothing like the fearful whisper they'd grown accustomed to. "But I needed time to complete my preparations." The simple statement silenced the room more effectively than a gunshot. Castrol watched the realization spread across the faces of the guards. The dangerous prisoner they'd mocked and tormented had been one of the most lethal operatives in military history, and she had allowed herself to be captured. "This facility is now compromised," Draylock stated, fighting to maintain composure. "Whatever your mission, it has failed. You are surrounded, outnumbered, and—" The lights throughout the detention block abruptly died, plunging them into darkness for 3 seconds before emergency systems engaged, bathing everything in dim red. Distant alarms sounded from multiple sectors simultaneously. When illumination returned, Morvain's smile was terrifying in its composure. "Colonel," she said almost gently, "your facility has been compromised since the moment I arrived. I've spent 23 days mapping your security systems, identifying structural weaknesses, and placing my assets." She glanced at her wrist as though checking the time, despite wearing no watch. "Right about now, your communications center should be experiencing a rather thorough systems failure." As if summoned by her words, Draylock's communication device emitted a burst of static before going silent. "Restrain her," he shouted. 2 guards moved forward. Castrol had served in 3 combat zones and witnessed some of the most elite soldiers in action. But what happened next occurred with such fluid efficiency that his mind struggled to process it. Both guards were disarmed and unconscious before anyone could react, their weapons now in Morvain's possession but pointed at the floor, a subtle yet clear indication that she could have killed them but chose restraint. "I recommend we move this conversation somewhere more comfortable," she said, stepping out of the cell with the casual confidence of someone strolling through their own home. "Your office, perhaps, Colonel? We have matters to discuss, and time is becoming a factor." Dr. Zevon found his voice. "The other prisoners, there was a pattern to your interactions with them during medical examinations." Morvain nodded appreciatively. "Perceptive, Doctor. I wondered if anyone would notice." She turned to Draylock. 3 of your prisoners are my operatives, placed here over the past 6 months. The rest are exactly what they appear to be." The revelation hit the colonel like a physical blow. "This is impossible. Our security protocols are impressive on paper," she finished for him. "Less so in execution. Now shall we proceed to your office? Or would you prefer I demonstrate further why my reputation precedes me?" Castrol watched Colonel Draylock's internal struggle play across his features. Rage, disbelief, and finally, grudging calculation. "Lieutenant Castrol, Dr. Zevon, with me. Sergeant Tar, maintain security here with 2 men. The rest, escort us to my office." As they moved through corridors now pulsing with alarm lights, Castrol observed how differently Morvain moved, economical, precise, each step placed with deliberate awareness. Other personnel they passed stared in confusion at the bedraggled prisoner walking unrestrained among senior officers. In Draylock's office, the colonel positioned himself behind his desk, clinging to the symbolic authority it provided. "What do you want, Commander?" "Direct. I appreciate that." Morvain seated herself without invitation. "I want Ambassador Therion, whom your government has officially denied capturing or holding." Draylock's expression confirmed the truth before he could formulate a denial. "The diplomat who disappeared in the Cadian border incident?" Castrol interjected, pieces falling into place. "Sir, is he here?" "Lieutenant, you are dismissed," Draylock snapped. "Actually," Morvain said, "I'd prefer he stay. Lieutenant Castrol has demonstrated both perception and integrity, qualities I suspect will be useful in the coming discussion." Something in her tone made it clear this wasn't a request. More alarmingly, Draylock didn't contest it. "You've gone to extraordinary lengths," the colonel said instead, "allowing yourself to be captured, enduring weeks of interrogation." "Interrogation?" Morvain raised an eyebrow. "Is that the term you use for what Sergeant Tar and her associates administered? Interesting euphemism." Draylock flushed. Military necessity in wartime. A justification as old as conflict itself, she replied, but irrelevant to our current situation. Ambassador Therian's location, Colonel. The diplomatic consequences of his continued detention will be significant. You're bluffing. There's no extraction team that could penetrate this facility even with your internal sabotage. The building shuddered as a distant explosion reverberated through the structure. That would be the ammunition depot, Morvain noted calmly. Regrettable but necessary as a diversion. Your soldiers will be occupied for approximately 17 minutes before regaining organizational control. I would prefer to resolve our business before then. Dr. Zevon stepped forward. She's right, Colonel. Whatever game you're playing here, it's over, if she is who her file claims. She single-handedly infiltrated 3 sovereign governments and collapsed them from within, Castrol finished. Sir, this isn't a battle we can win. Draylock's hand moved subtly toward the drawer where Castrol knew he kept a sidearm. Morvain's gaze flicked to the movement, but she made no defensive preparation, a confidence so complete it was more intimidating than any threat. Your weapon is currently unloaded, Colonel, she said conversationally. I took the liberty of requisitioning your ammunition during my 3rd interrogation session, when you left me alone for approximately 40 seconds while consulting Dr. Zevon about my psychological deterioration. Draylock yanked the drawer open, confirming her statement with a muttered curse. The ambassador, she repeated. My intelligence confirms he's being held in this facility, though not on any official detention level. Another explosion rocked the building, closer this time. Emergency klaxons changed their pattern, indicating fire in multiple sectors. Sublevel 6, Draylock finally graded out, behind the maintenance access in Section D. Morvain nodded. Lieutenant Castrol will accompany me to verify, along with Dr. Zevon to assess the ambassador's condition. You, Colonel, will remain here under guard. Under whose guard? Draylock challenged. The door to his office opened, revealing 2 of the compound's prisoners now armed and wearing partial guard uniforms. The transformation from broken captives to disciplined operatives was jarring. Lieutenant Doctor, shall we? Morvain stood, gesturing toward the door. As they navigated the chaos-filled corridors, personnel running to address multiple emergencies paid them little attention. Castrol found himself re-evaluating every interaction he'd witnessed during Morvain's captivity, recognizing the subtle manipulations and information gathering disguised as fear and confusion. Why reveal yourself now? He asked as they descended toward the sublevels. You clearly had the facility mapped days ago. 2 reasons, she replied. First, Ambassador Therian's health is deteriorating, according to Dr. Zevon's medical logs, which I accessed during my 2nd week here. The doctor startled. Those records are encrypted and isolated from the network. Yes, she agreed without elaboration. Second, the intelligence I've gathered has confirmed the ambassador possesses information vital to ending this conflict. The war has dragged on long enough, Lieutenant. Too many lives lost on both sides for what amounts to political theater. They reached sublevel 6, using Colonel Draylock's security credentials to bypass the final checkpoints. Behind the maintenance access panel, they discovered a hidden corridor leading to a small, sterile cell where a man lay on a medical bed, monitoring equipment surrounding him. Ambassador Therian was gaunt, his distinguished features hollow from his ordeal, but his eyes widened with recognition when Morvain stepped into view. Commander, he whispered hoarsely. They said the extraction had failed, that all operatives were lost. Disinformation has its uses, Ambassador. She turned to Dr. Zevon. His condition? The doctor was already examining the monitors. Malnourished, signs of interrogation stress, but stable for transport. Morvain nodded. Prepare him. We leave in 10 minutes. The compound is locked down, Castrol pointed out. Even with your operatives and sabotage, how do you plan to extract? For the first time, Morvain smiled, not the calculated expression she'd shown in her cell, but something genuine that transformed her features. Lieutenant, did you think I came alone? As if in answer, the facility's emergency communication system crackled to life with an unfamiliar voice. This is Captain Ryvan Kestris of the International Peacekeeping Force. We have established a secure perimeter around this facility following confirmed reports of international treaty violations. All personnel are ordered to stand down. Dr. Zevon looked at Morvain with new understanding. You're not just extracting the ambassador, you're exposing the entire operation. Wars end when secrets come to light, she replied, helping the ambassador to a sitting position. Lieutenant Castrol, you face a choice. The soldiers in this compound will respond to Colonel Draylock's orders out of habit and training, potentially resulting in unnecessary casualties. Or they could respond to the voice of reason. The implication was clear. Castrol's rank would allow him to issue stand-down orders that might be obeyed, especially in the confusion of multiple crises. He considered the classified file he'd glimpsed, the illegal detention of a diplomat, the systematic violation of treaties his government had publicly endorsed. His entire military career weighed against what he now recognized as the right course of action. I'll need access to the central communication system, he said finally. Morvain nodded to one of her operatives, who produced a security bypass device. This will grant you temporary access. Make it count, Lieutenant. As Dr. Zevon prepared the ambassador for transport, Castrol made his way to the nearest command terminal. With the bypass active, he accessed the facility-wide announcement system, took a deep breath, and began. Attention all personnel. This is Lieutenant Soren Castrol. The facility is currently surrounded by international peacekeeping forces responding to confirmed treaty violations. I am ordering an immediate stand-down. Repeat, all personnel are to stand down and follow evacuation protocols Alpha 7. He paused, knowing what he was about to say would irrevocably alter his future. Ambassador Therion is alive and in our custody. I repeat, we are illegally holding Ambassador Therion in violation of the Kadian Accords. All evidence will be surrendered to international authorities. Stand down immediately to prevent unnecessary loss of life. Throughout the compound, the chaos of multiple emergencies was gradually replaced by the controlled disorder of surrender protocols. Years of training in international law still held weight, even amidst conflicting loyalties. When they reached the main level, they found corridors filled with personnel evacuating according to protocols, most avoiding eye contact with the strange procession, the bedraggled prisoner now walking with authority, the missing diplomat on a medical gurney, and Lieutenant Castrol, whose transmission had effectively ended both their military careers. Colonel Draylock waited at the main entrance, flanked by Sergeant Tar and a contingent of loyal officers who had refused the stand-down order. Their weapons weren't raised, but their posture communicated clear hostility. Treason, Lieutenant, Draylock said, his voice tight with fury. You understand the penalty. The penalty for following illegal orders can be equally severe, Colonel, Castrol replied. The choice was clear. Morvain stepped forward. Your men are already surrendering, Colonel. The International Peacekeeping Force has secured the perimeter, and evidence of Ambassador Therion's illegal detention is being transmitted to global authorities as we speak. How this ends is entirely up to you. You think this changes anything? Draylock's laugh was bitter. This is one facility, one incident. The war continues regardless of your little victory here. Perhaps, Morvain conceded, but wars are ultimately sustained by public support. Support that tends to erode when citizens discover their leaders have been lying about fundamental causes. She gestured to Ambassador Therion. The ambassador carried evidence proving the Cadian border incident was staged by elements within both our governments to justify a conflict that primarily benefits weapons manufacturers and territorial expansionists. Draylock's expression faltered slightly. That's absurd propaganda. Is it? Morvain tilted her head. Then why was he held without acknowledgement? Why deny his capture if there was nothing to hide? She stepped closer, her voice lowered. You already know what he told your interrogators, Colonel. You've seen the evidence yourself. That's why you've been drinking more heavily these past weeks. The burden of following orders you know are morally bankrupt. Castrol watched the colonel's face, seeing the confirmation of Morvain's words in the subtle flinch at her accuracy. Stand down, Colonel, Castrol said quietly. It's over. For a moment, the outcome balanced on a knife's edge. Then Sergeant Tar, whose cruelty had seemed so unshakable just days earlier, lowered her weapon first. One by one, the other officers followed suit. Colonel Draylock remained rigid, isolated in his resistance. Then, with mechanical precision, he unholstered his sidearm, placed it on the ground, and stepped back. Outside, the compound's main gates opened to reveal a perimeter of armored vehicles bearing the unmistakable blue insignia of the International Peacekeeping Force. Medical teams rushed forward to take custody of Ambassador Therion, while uniformed peacekeepers moved to secure the surrendered officers. As the sun began to rise over the compound, casting long shadows across the rain-slick concrete, Commander Morvain stood alongside Lieutenant Castrol, watching as orders slowly emerged from chaos. "Your career is over," she observed without judgment. "Yes," he agreed, "but the war might be too. A fair exchange." She studied him with newfound respect. "The world needs more soldiers willing to recognize when not to fight, Lieutenant." She gestured toward the medical transport where Ambassador Therian was being settled. "Your testimony will be crucial in the days ahead. The evidence alone isn't enough. We need voices from within the system willing to speak truth." "And you?" Castrol asked. "Back to the shadows?" "For now." She looked toward the horizon where the first hints of dawn were breaking. "But shadows exist because of light, Lieutenant. Sometimes we work in darkness precisely to ensure the light remains." Dawn broke over the Vreskin military compound, painting the rain-slick concrete with pale golden light. Smoke rose from 3 separate buildings, evidence of the precise chaos orchestrated during the night. A remarkable tableau had formed at the main entrance. Commander Lystra Morvain stood tall in borrowed military attire that somehow looked more authentic on her than on the soldiers who normally wore it. Beside her, Ambassador Therian sat in a medical transport chair, a blanket covering his legs but his posture now dignified despite his ordeal. Behind them, a mixed group had assembled, 2 of Morvain's revealed operatives, Dr. Zivan attending to the ambassador, and Lieutenant Castrol, whose decision to assist rather than resist had surprised even himself. Colonel Draylock, now under guard from his own soldiers who had switched allegiance after the truth emerged, watched with barely contained fury as the compound's main gates opened. 3 military helicopters appeared on the horizon bearing neutral medical insignia rather than combat markings. "Your extraction team disguised as a medical evacuation," Castrol observed. "The diplomatic protocols would grant them access even during active conflict." Morvain inclined her head. "One of several contingencies. Your cooperation made this the preferable option, minimal casualties, clean resolution." Sergeant Tarr, now disarmed and standing with the other loyalist officers, broke protocol to speak. "Why not kill us? After what I did during interrogation." Morvain regarded her former tormentor with cool assessment. "Because this isn't about you, Sergeant, or revenge, or even justice, as satisfying as that might be." She gestured toward Ambassador Therian. "This is about ending a war that has claimed over 30,000 lives in 3 years. Personal grievances are luxuries compared to that objective." The helicopters descended, kicking up swirling mists from the rain-soaked landing pad. Medical personnel emerged, moving efficiently to secure the ambassador for transport. "What happens now?" Colonel Draylock demanded. "You expect me to believe you'll simply leave with the ambassador and that's the end of it?" "No, Colonel. This is merely the beginning." Morvain reached into her pocket and withdrew a data chip, which she handed to Lieutenant Castrol. "This contains evidence of the actual instigators of the border incident that began this conflict. Neither your government nor mine initiated hostilities. We were manipulated by a third party with financial interests in prolonged regional instability." Castrol accepted the chip with stunned recognition of its implications. "You had this information before your capture?" "Fragments. I needed access to your intelligence databases to complete the puzzle." She glanced at the loyalist officers. "Your superiors were aware of pieces of this conspiracy but chose to prioritize territorial gains over truth. The complete evidence should change that calculation." The lead helicopter's rotors increased in speed, signaling imminent departure. "You could have died here," Dr. Zivan said quietly. "The risk you took, allowing yourself to be captured, tortured, was calculated against the certainty of thousands more deaths if this conflict continues." Morvain's expression softened slightly. "Sometimes the greatest service requires the heaviest personal cost." She turned to board the helicopter but paused when Lieutenant Castrol stepped forward. "Commander," he said, standing at attention and offering a formal salute. After a moment's hesitation, even some of the compound's soldiers followed suit, a grudging acknowledgement of her extraordinary commitment and skill. As the helicopters lifted off, Lieutenant Castrol remained at attention, the data chip clutched in his hand, a weight that represented both burden and possibility. Beside him, Dr. Zyvon watched the departing aircraft with a thoughtful expression. Have you ever known someone who never asked for recognition, the doctor mused, but deserved it more than anyone else? Castrol considered the question, thinking of how Commander Morvain had endured weeks of deliberate humiliation and abuse, all while executing a mission of profound importance. How she had maintained her cover even when she could have revealed herself and demanded proper treatment. How she had prioritized peace over personal vindication. No, he answered honestly, not until today. The sun continued its ascent, illuminating the compound that would never again be the same. The legend of the Phantom of Karashev had grown, but Castrol now understood that the most remarkable aspect wasn't her tactical brilliance or combat prowess. It was her willingness to suffer in silence for a purpose greater than herself. As the helicopters disappeared over the horizon, he turned to face Colonel Draylock. Sir, with your permission, I'd like to begin transmission of this evidence to High Command immediately. Draylock's face registered conflict, the career-preserving instinct to suppress information versus the dawning recognition that the war itself was built on deception. Do it, he finally ordered, his voice rough with reluctant acceptance. If there's even a chance to end this madness, we owe it to our people. Later, as communication channels hummed with the revelations contained in Morvain's intelligence, Castrol stood at the window of the communications center, watching as the rain finally ceased. In the aftermath of chaos, a strange calm had settled over the compound, not the tense quiet of military discipline, but something more profound. The first fragile tendrils of peace, taking root in soil prepared by a woman who had willingly descended into darkness to create the possibility of light. Within hours, secure channels across both nations began to buzz with unprecedented activity. Coded transmissions, emergency cabinet meetings, military commands being rescinded. The machinery of war, so long in motion, began to stutter and hesitate as the truth spread through official channels. Ambassador Therion's testimony, broadcast globally under the protection of the International Peacekeeping Force, described in meticulous detail how elements within both governments had collaborated with a consortium of weapons manufacturers and resource extraction companies to stage the border incident. His evidence, combined with the data Commander Morvain had assembled, created an irrefutable case that was impossible to suppress. Lieutenant Castrol found himself in a strange position, neither hero nor traitor in the eyes of his comrades, but something more complicated. He had been summoned to regional headquarters to provide formal testimony, his military career effectively over, but his voice now carrying unexpected weight. As he prepared to depart the compound, Dr. Zyvon approached him in the officers' quarters. "I've been ordered to accompany you," the doctor said, his expression unreadable. "Apparently my medical logs of the ambassador's condition are considered crucial evidence." Castrol nodded. "And Sergeant Tarr?" "Under house arrest, along with the others directly involved in the enhanced interrogation protocols." Zyvon hesitated. "She asked me to give you this." He handed Castrol a small data drive. Upon inspection, it contained personnel files, security clearances, and a chain of command documentation showing exactly who had authorized the ambassador's detention and interrogation, names reaching far higher than Colonel Draylock. "She's attempting to bargain for leniency," Castrol observed. "Perhaps," Zyvon agreed. "Or perhaps something the commander said affected her more deeply than we realized." As they boarded the transport bound for headquarters, Castrol noticed how different the soldiers appeared, the arrogance and casual cruelty that had permeated the compound now replaced by uncertainty and introspection. An entire military installation forced to confront the possibility that their cause was not what they had believed. The regional headquarters was a sprawling complex situated on a mountain plateau, typically bustling with activity. Today, however, an unusual stillness hung over the facility. Officers moved with subdued purpose, conversations conducted in hushed tones. They were met by General Thaddeus Narvith, whose stern reputation had always preceded him. Today, however, the general's imposing presence seemed diminished, the weight of recent revelations evident in the new lines on his face. "Lieutenant Castrol," he acknowledged. "Dr. Zyvon, follow me." He led them not to an interrogation room as Castrol had expected, but to his private office, a sparse space dominated by maps and communication equipment. "Sit," he instructed. Once they were seated, he studied them in silence before speaking again. 3 hours ago, our government issued a statement denying the ambassador's allegations. 2 hours ago, our allies began publicly distancing themselves from that position. 1 hour ago, I received direct orders to prepare a full accounting of our detention facilities and prisoner treatment protocols. The general's expression remained carefully neutral. You understand what this means. The official narrative is collapsing, Castrol said. Precisely. Narvith leaned forward. Lieutenant, I need to know exactly what Commander Morvain said about the third party manipulating both sides. Every detail. Castrol recounted his conversations with Morvain, describing the evidence suggesting corporate interests had engineered the conflict for financial gain. As he spoke, the general's aide entered, placing a secure communication device on the desk. Sir, High Command is convening an emergency session in 30 minutes. Your presence is required. After the aide departed, General Narvith rose and moved to the window, gazing out at the mountain landscape. 27 years in service, he said quietly. I've fought in 3 conflicts, buried hundreds of soldiers, made decisions that cost lives, always believed it was in service to something greater. He turned to face them. How does one reconcile learning it was all built on lies? Neither Castrol nor Zevon had an answer. Report to the testimony chambers at UO800 tomorrow, Narvith instructed. Both of you, hold nothing back. He straightened his uniform with mechanical precision. The truth will be heard, regardless of who it implicates. After the general departed, Castrol and Zevon were escorted to temporary quarters. That evening, as Castrol reviewed his notes for the following day's testimony, his secure tablet chimed with an encrypted message from an unknown source. The message contained only coordinates and a time, 3 hours hence, in a secluded area of the headquarters' eastern garden. Instinct told him who it was from. The garden was deserted at that late hour, illuminated only by scattered pathway lights and the waxing moon overhead. Castrol made his way to the specified location, a small pavilion partially obscured by ornamental trees. Commander Morvain waited there, though he almost didn't recognize her. Gone were the prison garments and the calculated fragility. She wore nondescript civilian clothing, her hair now shorter, her bearing unmistakably that of the elite operative she truly was. Lieutenant, she greeted him, you've caused quite a stir. As intended, I suspect, he replied, though I'm surprised to find you here, in the heart of what was enemy territory until very recently. The best place to hide is often where no one expects to find you. She gestured for him to sit beside her on the stone bench. Tomorrow's testimony will be crucial. There are elements still attempting to control the narrative, to frame this as an isolated incident rather than systemic corruption. General Narvith seems genuinely disturbed by the revelations. He was not among those who knew, she confirmed. A good soldier following orders without questioning their origin. There are many like him on both sides. Castrol studied her, trying to reconcile this composed, articulate strategist with the trembling, fearful prisoner he had first encountered. What happens now? Peace negotiations will begin within a week, she said with certainty. Too much has been exposed for the conflict to continue with public support. But peace is merely the absence of war, Lieutenant. True resolution requires justice. She handed him a small device. This contains names of civilians displaced by the conflict, communities destroyed, families separated. When you testify about military strategies and political machinations, remember to speak of them as well. Wars are measured in more than territory gained or lost. And you? He asked. Where does the Phantom of Karashev go when there are no more shadows to operate from? For the first time, he saw genuine uncertainty cross her features. There are always shadows, Lieutenant. Always those who profit from conflict, who manipulate nations and peoples for their gain. She looked up at the stars. But perhaps for a time I can step into the light. As she rose to leave, Castrol stood as well. Commander, he said, what you endured in that cell, what Sergeant Tarr and the others did, knowing who you were, what you were capable of, how did you maintain the deception? By remembering its purpose. Her expression grew distant. Physical pain ends, humiliation fades, but the deaths of thousands endure through generations. Some prices are worth paying. With that, she vanished into the darkness of the garden, leaving Castrol alone with the weight of tomorrow's testimony and the hope that from the ashes of deception, something better might arise. The next morning, as he entered the testimony chambers to face the assembled military command, diplomatic corps, and international observers, Lieutenant Soren Castrol carried not just the evidence Commander Morvain had provided, but the understanding that sometimes the greatest acts of courage occur not on battlefields, but in moments of moral choice, when one person refuses to perpetuate a lie. And in the shadows, watching as truth finally emerged into light, the Phantom of Karashev permitted herself a brief moment of satisfaction before turning her attention to the next mission, the next injustice requiring someone willing to become whatever was necessary to see it ended.